September 12, 1944. The relentless Pacific sun had already begun its fiery assault by 0800 hours as Major Robert "Cowboy" Stout expertly maneuvered himself into the confined cockpit of his formidable F-6F Hellcat, situated on the expansive flight deck of the USS Hornet. The carrier's surface was a maelstrom of organized activity, a vibrant tapestry of deck crews, distinguished by their brightly colored jerseys, scurrying with urgent precision between various aircraft, while the pungent aroma of aviation fuel mingled inextricably with the invigorating scent of salt-laden ocean air. Above it all, the incessant, throaty roar of powerful engines, diligently warming up, presaged the day's impending, critical missions. By this pivotal morning, Stout had already completed a remarkable 63 combat missions, a testament to his valor and skill. Yet, an ineffable sense of unease permeated the air, a subtle divergence from the routine. The intelligence briefings delivered the previous night had been conspicuously vague, almost dismissive in their presentation. The designated objective was Peleliu, a seemingly insignificant speck of coral and dense jungle nestled within the sprawling Palau Islands, a locale utterly unfamiliar to the vast majority of Americans. In a mere 3 days, an imposing force of 15,000 Marines was slated to assault those very beaches, an operation optimistically touted by high-ranking commanders as a swift, 3-day engagement. The stark, historical reality, however, would unveil a grueling 2-month conflict, tragically claiming nearly 10,000 casualties. This grim foreknowledge, mercifully, remained hidden from Stout. His assigned mission, on paper, appeared deceptively straightforward: conduct a reconnaissance flight over the northern airfields, meticulously capture a series of photographs, and subsequently relay his findings. The military high command urgently required confirmation that Japanese air power within the region was indeed minimal. Prior reconnaissance sorties had consistently reported the airfields as either completely deserted or only lightly defended. Stout's task, in essence, was a bureaucratic formality, a final verification before the grand invasion commenced. He had executed dozens of these seemingly innocuous milk runs before, missions characterized by their tedium and predictability, where the most significant peril was the risk of succumbing to slumber at the controls during the lengthy return journey. However, on this particular occasion, the underlying intelligence proved to be catastrophically erroneous. As Stout's Hellcat gracefully approached Peleliu from the eastern quadrant, maintaining a steady altitude of 8,000 feet, he initiated his standard photo run protocol. The specialized camera, strategically mounted directly behind his cockpit, was designed to automatically capture a series of overlapping images as he maintained a straight and level flight path over the designated target area. It was at this precise moment that his gaze locked onto an astonishing sight, an image that simultaneously sent a chilling sensation coursing through his veins and propelled his finely honed tactical mind into an instantaneous state of hyper-alertness. The airfield, far from being abandoned, was teeming with activity. Rows upon meticulously arranged rows of Japanese aircraft rested wingtip to wingtip on the tarmac, presenting an unsettling tableau reminiscent of sardines tightly packed within a tin. Among the densely arrayed aircraft were numerous Mitsubishi A6M0s, those notoriously agile fighters that had so decisively dominated the initial phases of the war. Alongside them sat Nakajima B-5N torpedo bombers and Aichi D-3A dive bombers. All these formidable machines were visibly fueled, fully armed, and poised for immediate deployment, ready to unleash a devastating onslaught upon the invasion fleet that was, at that very moment, inexorably steaming towards Peleliu. Stout, drawing upon his extensive combat experience, rapidly conducted a mental count, his seasoned eye quickly estimating the aircraft density. A minimum of 40 planes, possibly even more, subtly concealed beneath camouflage netting near the verdant jungle's edge. This was unequivocally not a mere token defensive contingent. This was a formidable strike group, strategically positioned and primed to launch a catastrophic attack on the American ships lurking just beyond the horizon. Should those enemy planes manage to become airborne during the impending invasion, they possessed the terrifying capability to utterly decimate the vulnerable transport ships laden with thousands of Marines. Countless men would perish in the unforgiving waters before ever reaching the sandy shores. The entirety of the meticulously planned operation could easily devolve into an unimaginable bloodbath, one that would render the horrific casualties of Tarawa appear as a mere practice drill. His radio, meanwhile, crackled with the routine check-ins from other pilots operating in the vicinity, their voices resonating with a calm, professional composure. Stout's thumb hovered momentarily over the transmit button. Established protocol unequivocally demanded that he report this critical discovery immediately, disengage from the area, and permit the fleet to scramble a proper, coordinated strike package. However, by the time he could return to the carrier, meticulously filed his report, and endeavored to persuade skeptical intelligence officers that they had overlooked an entire operational airbase, precious, irretrievable hours would have elapsed. The Japanese forces would undoubtedly disperse these aircraft, cleverly concealing them within fortified revetments, or, far worse, launch them against the unsuspecting fleet. Presently, they were utterly exposed, like sitting ducks, likely awaiting confirmation from their own dawn reconnaissance of the invasion fleet's precise position before initiating their devastating counterattack. Stout executed another pass, this time deliberately descending to a lower altitude of 3,000 feet to obtain a more granular perspective. His keen photographer's eye meticulously catalogued every discernible detail, even as his primal fighter pilot instinct screamed urgent warnings regarding potential anti-aircraft positions. The airfield itself stretched impressively along Peleliu's northern coastline, featuring a single, well-defined runway expertly carved out of the indigenous coral and dense jungle, with expansive dispersal areas fanning out symmetrically on either side. What particularly seized his attention was not merely the sheer number of aircraft, but rather the highly unusual manner in which they were arranged. Someone on the ground had committed a grievous, potentially fatal error, likely driven by the pressing urgency of preparing for their own offensive strike mission. The planes were parked in tight, orderly rows, with barely 15 feet separating each aircraft. Standard military procedure would dictate their dispersal, concealment beneath the natural canopy of trees, and protection within reinforced revetments. Instead, they presented a striking visual impression, as if meticulously lined up for an inspection day at a flight school. Through the transparent expanse of his canopy, Stout could distinctly observe ground crews diligently moving between the aircraft. These diminutive figures, clad in their characteristic khaki uniforms, were engaged in a flurry of activity, rolling heavy fuel drums, meticulously carrying ammunition belts, and performing essential pre-flight checks. Unbeknownst to them, an American fighter aircraft silently circled above. Why would they be aware? Japanese early warning radar systems in this particular sector were, at best, rudimentary, and single aircraft reconnaissance flights were sufficiently commonplace that they rarely triggered a full-scale alert. The pervasive sense of complacency was almost palpable, even from his vantage point at 3,000 feet. These crews, in their hubris, believed they commanded the skies this morning. They were convinced they had ample time. Stout's rigorous tactical analysis was now operating at its zenith. He had received comprehensive training in ground attack at Pensacola, dedicating weeks to perfecting strafing runs on stationary target sleds and the painted hulks of decommissioned trucks. The established doctrine was unequivocally straightforward. Approach at a low altitude and high speed, deliver a single, devastating pass upon the target, and then swiftly withdraw before concentrated ground fire could accurately track your position. However, this doctrine inherently presumed an attack on one or two isolated targets, not an entire, fully operational airbase. His Hellcat was equipped with an impressive array of 6.50 caliber machine guns, 3 strategically mounted in each wing, with each gun loaded to capacity with 400 rounds. This formidable armament provided him with a total of 2,400 rounds. Considering the Browning M2's cyclic rate of 750 rounds per minute, he could sustain approximately 12 seconds of continuous, unremitting fire before exhausting his ammunition supply. Could he realistically destroy 40 planes in a mere 12 seconds? The arithmetic simply did not align, not in any conventional interpretation. Yet, the more Stout meticulously scrutinized the airfield's layout, the more profoundly he comprehended that conventional thinking was utterly inapplicable in this extraordinary scenario. These aircraft were not merely parked in close proximity. They were dangerously positioned directly adjacent to their vital fuel supplies. He could clearly discern the drums, stacked precariously beside each plane, undoubtedly containing high-octane aviation gasoline, awaiting transfer into the aircraft's tanks for the morning's anticipated strike. A single, well-placed tracer round impacting a fuel drum would instantly transform it into a volatile bomb. One burning aircraft would inevitably propagate fire to its immediate neighbors. The Japanese, through a critical oversight, had inadvertently engineered a massive, self-sustaining chain reaction, patiently awaiting its ignition. This was not going to be a mission focused on individually shooting down 40 planes. This was about strategically lighting a fuse and allowing the immutable laws of thermodynamics to accomplish the remainder of the devastating work. He quickly glanced at his fuel gauge, sufficient for the impending strike and the return flight, with a reasonable reserve remaining. His ammunition counter indicated full loads across all 6 guns. The Hellcat felt reassuringly solid beneath him, remarkably responsive, and undeniably ready for action. This particular aircraft had faithfully carried him through 63 perilous missions. He trusted it implicitly, much like a seasoned rider trusts a reliable steed. However, trust, no matter how profound, could not entirely eliminate the inherent risks. Down there, somewhere nestled within the dense jungle encircling that airfield, Japanese anti-aircraft positions lay in wait. Type 96 25mm autocannons, likely the standard light anti-aircraft weapon within the Japanese inventory, would be meticulously scanning the expansive sky, their operators' fingers poised on triggers. The moment he initiated his first pass, the instant those powerful machine guns began to roar, every single gun position on that island would erupt, directing a concentrated barrage of fire directly at him. He would be utterly alone, completely unsupported, flying directly into an inferno of steel, with no wingman to provide cover, and no prospect of rescue should he be shot down. The critical decision point crystallized within Stout's mind with an almost blinding clarity. Every precious second he spent merely circling was another second those enemy aircraft remained poised to inflict grievous harm upon American sailors and Marines. He possessed the option to radio back to the carrier, patiently await orders, and observe as a proper, coordinated strike package was meticulously organized, complete with combat air patrol, CAP, fighters, dive bombers, and the entire synchronized ballet of naval aviation. Such an undertaking would consume a minimum of 90 minutes, likely closer to 2 hours, factoring in briefings and launch sequences. By then, Japanese spotters would almost certainly have reported the invasion fleet's precise position. Those 40 aircraft would then be airborne, widely scattered, and actively hunting. The fleeting window of opportunity would then slam shut, irrevocably. Military doctrine existed for profoundly valid reasons. Effective coordination demonstrably saved lives. The application of overwhelming force invariably minimized risk. Meticulous planning consistently averted disasters. Stout had diligently attended all the lectures at flight school, thoroughly absorbing every lesson regarding the imperative of never engaging the enemy without adequate support. However, doctrine, by its very nature, could not possibly account for every conceivable situation. Sometimes, the brutal reality of war presented an individual with a unique moment that existed entirely outside the established rule book, a singular convergence of circumstances that would never again be replicated. This was precisely that moment. 40 enemy aircraft, densely packed together like ammunition within a magazine, utterly vulnerable, and possessing the potential to irrevocably alter the entire trajectory of the Polilu invasion if permitted to remain intact. And, facing this formidable challenge, was one solitary American pilot, armed with a fully loaded Hellcat and the exceptional skill to wield it. The rational, calculating segment of Stout's brain meticulously catalogued every conceivable way this audacious plan could go catastrophically awry. Concentrated anti-aircraft fire could utterly shred his Hellcat on the initial pass, sending him cartwheeling into the dense jungle below in a fiery explosion. A single, lucky shot could sever his critical hydraulic lines, rendering him completely incapable of controlling the aircraft. His guns, even the notoriously reliable Brownings, could jam, a not uncommon occurrence, particularly in the oppressive humidity of the Pacific air. He could tragically misjudge his altitude during the attack run and plow directly into the unforgiving ground at a blistering 300 miles per hour. Any of these dire outcomes meant a solitary death on a nameless island, his body never to be recovered, his grieving family destined to receive a telegram bearing the antiseptic, heartbreaking phrase, "Missing in action, presumed dead." The other half of that crucial calculation presented an equally stark reality. Should those Japanese aircraft succeed in launching their offensive, American transport vessels face certain annihilation. The cumbersome, fragile ships, burdened with their precious cargo of marines and vital equipment, would inevitably transform into fiery tombs under the relentless assault of torpedo and dive bombers. Stout possessed vivid recollections of harrowing combat footage from preceding invasions, where he had witnessed vessels erupting into colossal infernos and plunging beneath the waves, consigning hundreds of servicemen to a watery grave. He had also absorbed the desperate radio transmissions of pilots arriving too late to intercept such attacks, their voices laced with anguish as they watched the ships succumb. Such a catastrophe simply could not be permitted to unfold here, not when he held the decisive power to avert it. Not when a formidable contingent of 40 enemy aircraft lay exposed below him, arrayed like static targets on a firing range. Beyond the immediate imperative of protection, there existed another, less tangible but profoundly compelling factor, the sheer, unadulterated tactical windfall. Across a distinguished career spanning 63 combat missions, Stout had never before encountered enemy aircraft positioned with such flawless vulnerability, ripe for utter obliteration. The vast majority of aerial engagements throughout the Pacific theater involved arduous, high-altitude dogfights, consuming precious fuel in pursuit of elusive Zeros through obscuring cloud formations, or launching assaults against heavily fortified strongholds with often negligible outcomes. This encounter, however, was fundamentally different. It represented the quintessential fantasy scenario for every fighter pilot, the kind of legendary opportunity pilots recounted with bravado in ready rooms, but rarely, if ever, experienced in reality. The Japanese command had committed a profound tactical blunder, an egregious operational misstep, and the very essence of warfare dictated the ruthless exploitation of such errors before any chance of rectification arose. With resolute intent, Stout's hand instinctively found the throttle lever, pushing it decisively forward. The formidable Pratt and Whitney engine of the Hellcat responded with a profound, guttural crescendo, its 18 cylinders unleashing a staggering 2,000 horsepower. He then pitched the aircraft's nose downward, initiating his rapid descent. The time for further radio transmissions or methodical reconnaissance orbits had passed. The critical decision had been irrevocably made. Within the next 30 seconds, he would either ascend to the annals of legend or be reduced to a mere statistic. Irrespective of his personal fate, those Japanese aircraft would assuredly not launch their destructive raid against the invasion fleet. He would personally guarantee that outcome, or perish in the monumental endeavor. The Hellcat plummeted with the predatory swiftness of a hawk fixing its gaze upon prey, Stout's altimeter unwinding rapidly through the 2,000-foot mark, then the 1,500-foot interval. He meticulously leveled his formidable machine at an astonishingly low 50 feet above the dense canopy of treetops, so precariously close that the fronds of palm trees whipped violently in the turbulence of his prop wash. At this exceptionally low altitude, he effectively evaded the majority of radar detection capabilities and entered a specific operational envelope where anti-aircraft gunners invariably struggle to acquire and track such a rapidly moving target. The airfield surged toward him with terrifying speed, leaving him perhaps a mere 3 seconds to finalize the intricate geometry of his attack. The neatly arranged rows of Japanese aircraft were oriented along a northeast to southwest axis, meticulously parked parallel to the main runway. Stout meticulously planned his approach to be precisely perpendicular to these rows, a strategic choice that would enable him to traverse multiple lines of enemy aircraft in a single, devastating pass, rather than merely following the length of one row. This maximized the number of targets within his lethal cone of fire, significantly increasing the probability of initiating the catastrophic chain reaction he so desperately sought. His airspeed indicator registered a blistering 310 miles per hour as he cleared the final line of dense jungle. The airfield then dramatically unfurled before him, presenting a tableau akin to an enormous shooting gallery. And with startling suddenness, individual details became exquisitely clear, bewildered ground crew members glancing upward, their expressions of confusion morphing into stark terror within a fleeting split second of recognition. Fuel drums stacked 3 high alongside each aircraft, and even a Zero, its engine cowling conspicuously open, still undergoing routine maintenance procedures. Stout's thumb instinctively located the firing button positioned on his control stick. The formidable battery of 6.50 caliber Brownings were meticulously synchronized to converge their deadly streams of fire at a precise point 300 yards ahead, thereby generating an utterly devastating cone of destruction capable of tearing through any obstacle in its path. Each gun discharged a lethal combination of armor-piercing incendiary rounds interspersed with standard ball ammunition, a potent mix specifically engineered to perforate aircraft skin and violently ignite volatile fuel systems. He pressed the button with unwavering resolve. The Hellcat immediately shuddered violently as all 6 guns simultaneously erupted, producing a cacophony akin to the sound of tearing canvas magnified 1,000-fold. Brilliant streams of tracers arced forth from his wings, every 5th round glowing a vivid, incandescent red, serving as crucial visual cues for pilots to precisely walk their destructive fire onto the intended targets. Stout meticulously aimed for the initial row of aircraft, specifically targeting the narrow gap between two zeros where he had observed a dense cluster of fuel drums. The relentless torrent of .50 caliber rounds marched inexorably across the hard coral tarmac, kicking up plumes of brilliant white dust, before stitching a devastating path into the fuselage of the first Zero. Its metal skin peeled away with shocking ease, resembling fragile tissue paper under the savage onslaught. He maintained pressure on the trigger for 2 agonizingly long seconds, unleashing approximately 25 rounds per gun, totaling an astounding 150 rounds, before subtly adjusting his aim slightly to the left. The clustered fuel drums then detonated, not in a singular, synchronized explosion, but in a horrifying, cascading sequence that appeared eerily choreographed. The initial drum erupted in a spectacular orange fireball that instantaneously engulfed its immediate neighbors. High-octane aviation gasoline, when atomized and ignited, does not merely burn. It violently detonates, generating powerful overpressure waves that propagate ferociously through the vaporized fuel. This primary explosion then catastrophically ignited the Zero's wing tank, which had almost certainly been completely topped off in preparation for that morning's planned strike. The fighter aircraft was utterly consumed in a colossal secondary blast, which propelled burning fuel in a deadly spray across 2 adjacent aircraft, setting them ablaze. Stout, a blur of speed, had already surged past the initial destruction, his tracers now relentlessly seeking out the next row of targets, hammering with destructive force into the distended fuselage of a Nakajima torpedo bomber. This particular aircraft, being considerably larger and heavier, was absolutely brimming with fuel, specifically configured for extended-range strikes against distant naval vessels. When it spectacularly detonated, the resulting blast was of such immense power that Stout distinctly felt the concussive shockwave buffet his Hellcat, even as he hurtled past at an undiminished 300 miles per hour. He was now 4 seconds into his devastating strafing run, approximately halfway across the sprawling airfield. Behind him, an inferno of terrifying speed and intensity was rapidly spreading. The Japanese had committed a fatal error by parking their aircraft in such close proximity, ensuring that burning fuel from one inevitably cascaded onto its neighbors. Aircraft-grade aluminum, a primary structural component, possesses a melting point of 1,220 degrees Fahrenheit, while avgas, the fuel, burns at an astounding 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit. Wing tanks, unable to withstand the intense thermal stress, were rupturing even before the flames physically touched them, disgorging hundreds of gallons of fuel that instantly flash-ignited, further feeding the raging conflagration. Ground crew members, caught entirely by surprise, were now frantically scattering in every conceivable direction, some desperately attempting to reach fire suppression equipment, but the vast majority simply fleeing for their very lives. Sporadic anti-aircraft positions were finally beginning to respond, faint muzzle flashes winking intermittently from camouflaged emplacements near the runway, yet their fire was wildly inaccurate, tracking the burgeoning smoke and chaos rather than the Hellcat, which had already surged far beyond their effective fields of fire. Stout maintained an unwavering pressure on his trigger, hosing a continuous stream of rounds across the third and fourth rows of parked aircraft. A line of Aichi dive bombers absorbed the brutal impact of his fire, their comparatively thin aluminum skins offering absolutely no meaningful protection against the devastating force of the .50 caliber armor-piercing rounds. He briefly glimpsed bombs still slung beneath the wings of one particular aircraft in the fleeting fraction of a second before his tracers found their mark. The ensuing explosion was nothing short of catastrophic. A truly massive detonation sent a colossal mushroom cloud of dense black smoke billowing violently upward. Shrapnel, propelled with incredible force from this blast, savagely shredded two nearby Zeros, transforming these once pristine fighters into grotesquely twisted metal sculptures in the blink of an eye. The resulting shock wave was of such immense power that debris audibly pattered against Stout's reinforced canopy, small, sharp fragments of aircraft pinging off the resilient glass. The entire airfield was rapidly transforming into a veritable hell on Earth. What had commenced as precise, surgical strikes on fuel drums had swiftly escalated into an uncontrollable, all-consuming conflagration. Flames were now leaping indiscriminately from aircraft to aircraft, spreading relentlessly through vast pools of burning gasoline that flowed across the tarmac, following the subtle grade of the runway. Secondary explosions were erupting every few seconds as volatile ammunition, cooked off, inside the burning aircraft, machine gun rounds from the fighters, larger 20mm cannon shells, and even some of the smaller bombs that had not yet been loaded. Each successive explosion only served to amplify the pervasive chaos, generating more deadly shrapnel, igniting more fires, and precipitating even greater destruction. The smoke now ascended in towering, thick black columns, a colossal plume that would be unmistakably visible from the distant carrier task force, positioned 50 miles away. Ground crew members, many of whom had been performing routine maintenance, found themselves tragically trapped between the raging inferno of burning aircraft and the impenetrable jungle. Stout caught fleeting glimpses of their desperate plight in his peripheral vision as he roared past, men plunging into drainage ditches for cover, others futilely beating at the voracious flames with their jackets in doomed attempts to salvage aircraft that were already irrevocably lost. A fuel truck, which had been in the process of servicing the bombers, absorbed a concentrated burst of his fire and exploded with sufficient force to violently flip it onto its side, its substantial cargo of high-octane fuel adding another 1,000 gallons to the already raging inferno. The heat had now intensified to such an extreme degree that Stout could distinctly perceive its oppressive presence within his cockpit, even at an exhilarating 300 miles per hour, a palpable wave of thermal energy that caused the air to shimmer and distorted his view of the remaining targets ahead. His ammunition counters were rapidly winding down. He had expended approximately half of his total load in that initial, devastating pass, roughly 1,200 rounds across all 6 guns. Yet, the scale of destruction was multiplying exponentially, far exceeding anything he could have achieved through gunfire alone. The Japanese had inadvertently orchestrated a perfect storm of vulnerability, densely concentrated fuel supplies, aircraft packed in dangerously close proximity, woefully inadequate fire suppression equipment, and, most likely, minimal training for their ground crews on how to effectively manage a disaster of this magnitude. Every conceivable element that could go catastrophically wrong was indeed unfolding against them, and Stout, in his singular act of defiance, had been the decisive catalyst that set this entire devastating chain of events in motion. He executed a sharp, upward pull at the far end of the airfield, rapidly climbing to an altitude of 500 feet to thoroughly assess the extent of the damage and meticulously plan his subsequent maneuver. Anti-aircraft fire was now noticeably intensifying, black puffs of 25mm shells bursting ominously around his aircraft, as the gunners on the ground finally began to acquire a more accurate range. Tracers from numerous light machine guns arced upward from multiple positions, weaving a perilous web of incandescent fire through which he was forced to navigate. The Japanese forces were clearly succumbing to panic, firing indiscriminately at anything that moved, yet their accuracy remained woefully inadequate. The dual forces of fear and the obscuring smoke were utterly compromising their aim, were compromising their accuracy. Stout, with a seasoned pilot's intuition, executed a sharp, aggressive bank to the right, strategically leveraging his superior altitude to remain outside the immediate range of the most intense ground-based anti-aircraft fire. This maneuver afforded him a crucial moment to assess the profound impact of his initial assault. The northern sector of the enemy airfield was now a raging inferno, a chaotic tableau of fire and destruction. A grim tally revealed that at least 15 enemy aircraft had been either consumed by the flames or utterly obliterated, their forms reduced to grotesque, charred skeletal remains. Yet, his gaze swept southward, noting with a professional eye that the southern dispersal area still presented an array of viable targets. He meticulously counted an additional 20 to 25 aircraft that had, by sheer luck or strategic placement, escaped the wrath of his first devastating pass. A few of these, he observed, were already being frantically maneuvered by desperate ground crews, attempting to taxi them away from the encroaching conflagration. This, Stout mused with a wry grin concealed by his oxygen mask, was a tactical blunder of significant proportions. Such desperate efforts transformed static, easily targeted assets into mobile, albeit still highly vulnerable, objectives, paradoxically simplifying his task. With renewed resolve, he nudged the control stick forward, meticulously aligning his formidable warplane for its pivotal second attack run. The nature of this second pass, Stout understood with absolute clarity, would be fundamentally distinct from the first. The invaluable element of surprise, which had granted him such devastating effectiveness initially, had vanished, replaced by a fully awakened and deeply incensed enemy. These forces had just witnessed, in horrifying detail, their vital airfield transformed into a veritable crematorium. Every single anti-aircraft gun in placement across the entire island of Peleliu was now unerringly tracking his every move, their crews frantically adjusting elevation wheels and meticulously calculating lead trajectories. Adding to the perilous complexity was the pervasive presence of thick, oily columns of black smoke, billowing thousands of feet into the atmosphere, not only obscuring critical targets, but also generating unpredictable and violent turbulence, rendering precise, stable flight a near impossibility. Nevertheless, the remaining aircraft, stubbornly arrayed across the southern dispersal area, represented an equally potent and unacceptable threat as those already engulfed in flames. Their continued existence was simply not an option. This time, he approached from an entirely new vector, sweeping in from the southeast, a deliberate deviation from his previous attack path. This was a fundamental tenet of combat survival. Never replicate a past attack pattern, lest the enemy gunners learn to anticipate and exploit your predictable movements. His airspeed, a carefully calculated 280 miles per hour, was marginally slower than before. This reduction afforded him superior target resolution, allowing for more precise identification, but it simultaneously exposed him to a heightened risk from ground fire. This trade-off, however, was deemed absolutely necessary. At his previous speed of 310 miles per hour, the ground targets had been a fleeting blur. At 280 miles per hour, he could meticulously select individual aircraft, ensuring that every precious, remaining round would find its mark with lethal efficiency. His ammunition reserves were rapidly approaching a critical juncture. A mere 800 rounds, perhaps, remained distributed across his formidable array of 6 machine guns, a meager quantity that translated to approximately 6 seconds of continuous firing time if he were to hold the trigger down without interruption. The anti-aircraft fire that now enveloped him was a terrifying, mesmerizing spectacle, a veritable light show of impending death. Tracers, incandescent streaks apparel, crisscrossed his flight path with alarming frequency, some passing so disconcertingly close that he could distinctly perceive the glowing projectile streaking past the reinforced transparency of his canopy. A 25mm shell detonated with a concussive shock just 30 feet to his left, its violent explosion sending a shower of shrapnel rattling ominously against the sturdy fuselage of his aircraft. Another burst erupted directly ahead, compelling him to execute an abrupt, evasive bank to the right, a maneuver that, for a precious, fleeting second, disrupted his meticulously honed aim. The Japanese gunners, he observed with a grim appreciation, were demonstrably improving, adapting with unsettling speed to his altered velocity and altitude, meticulously establishing deadly, kill boxes that he was now forced to navigate. In the crucible of this escalating danger, Stout's rigorous training instinctively asserted itself. The ingrained mantra echoed in his mind. Never maintain a straight flight path for more than 2 seconds. Always be altering something, altitude, heading, or speed, to render yourself an unpredictable target. He unleashed a devastating torrent of fire upon a cluster of 50 fighter aircraft, which frantic ground crews were desperately attempting to taxi towards the concealing embrace of the nearby jungle. His tracers, guided by an uncanny precision, unerringly found the lead aircraft, raking it with a devastating swath of projectiles from its spinning propeller to its tail assembly. The Zero's fuel tank, unable to withstand the assault, erupted in a violent explosion, and suddenly the pilot was seen scrambling in a desperate, fiery escape from the burning cockpit, his flight suit already consumed by flames. The stricken aircraft shuddered to a halt, instantly transforming into yet another blazing torch. Stout, with an almost surgical adjustment of his aim, caught the second Zero as it attempted a desperate evasive maneuver, hammering rounds relentlessly into its engine compartment. A fine, white mist of coolant erupted from the damaged engine, which then seized with a grinding protest, bringing the aircraft to an abrupt, shuddering standstill. 3 more precise bursts from his guns effectively incapacitated 2 additional fighters within the group. The 5th Zero, through sheer luck and desperate maneuvering, managed to reach the treeline, but a fortuitous shot from Stout's dwindling ammunition supply punctured something vital, causing it to nosedive violently into the dense jungle foliage, effectively putting it out of commission, even if not fully destroyed. A harsh, metallic clicking signaled the complete depletion of his portside ammunition. The 3 left-wing Browning machine guns had run dry. He still possessed his starboard guns, with perhaps 300 rounds remaining, but this asymmetric firepower introduced a new challenge, making precise aiming considerably more intricate. The Hellcat, now unbalanced by the uneven recoil, exhibited a persistent tendency to pull to the left. He skillfully counteracted this with precise rudder pressure, his eyes scanning for new targets. He spotted a pair of dive bombers, sitting inert near a carefully camouflaged revetment, likely in the process of being armed for an impending strike. He methodically walked his remaining tracers across both aircraft, punching devastating holes through their cockpits and fuel cells. One immediately erupted in a fiery conflagration. The other, initially spared, merely sat there, steadily leaking fuel until the rapidly spreading flames from its burning neighbor reached the accumulating puddle, at which point both aircraft detonated in a deeply satisfying, synchronous double explosion. A sudden, jarring impact slammed into the tail section of his Hellcat. It was a solid, undeniable hit that sent a violent shudder through the entire airframe. Stout's eyes instinctively darted to his instrument panel, meticulously scanning for any ominous red warning lights or plummeting gauge needles. To his immense relief, the oil pressure remained steadfastly within normal parameters. The hydraulic system registered as nominal. Crucially, all control surfaces continued to respond with reassuring precision. Whatever projectile had struck him, It had mercifully failed to sever any critical systems, yet it served as a stark, visceral reminder that his extraordinary luck could not endure indefinitely. Every passing second he lingered over this hostile airfield dramatically amplified the probability that a Japanese gunner, through sheer chance, would achieve a lucky hit in a location his resilient Hellcat could not absorb. He squeezed off his final burst of ammunition at a fuel truck position near the runway, watching with grim satisfaction as it erupted in a spectacular explosion of flames, then pulled up hard and decisively, turning his formidable aircraft towards the boundless expanse of the open ocean. His starboard guns, too, were now completely dry. All 2,400 rounds had been expended, a devastating expenditure delivered in approximately 15 seconds of actual trigger time, meticulously spread across his two harrowing passes. Behind him, the airfield at Pleu was, quite literally, dying. Stout permitted himself one final, retrospective glance over his shoulder as he ascended to a safer, more strategic altitude, and the spectacle that unfolded beneath him was almost surreal in its utter completeness. The entire northern sector was now a raging inferno, a colossal pyre. Columns of dense, black smoke merged into a single, monumental pillar that ascended majestically to over 10,000 feet into the pristine tropical sky. The southern sector, he observed, was scarcely less devastated. Nearly every aircraft he had targeted during his second, audacious pass was either actively burning or lay utterly disabled, each adding its own contribution of smoke to the already apocalyptic panorama. From a distance of 5 miles, the intense heat shimmer was distinctly visible, distorting the air above the runway like a grotesque mirage. Ground crews, abandoning any futile pretense of extinguishing the raging fires, were now simply desperately attempting to survive, staying clear of the ammunition that continued to cook off in random, terrifying staccato bursts. The tactical implications of his singular, audacious mission were nothing short of staggering, and Stout's highly trained mind, as his adrenaline rush slowly began to recede, seamlessly transitioned from immediate survival concerns to a comprehensive strategic assessment. 40 Japanese aircraft destroyed or rendered utterly inoperable in an astonishingly brief period of approximately 8 minutes of intense combat action. This was far more than merely a successful strike. It represented the complete and utter elimination of Japanese air power within the critical Pleu sector. These very aircraft, he knew, had constituted the Japanese Navy's meticulously planned aerial response to the impending American invasion. Without them, the Japanese garrison entrenched on Pleu was now effectively blind and utterly defenseless against any future air attacks. The United States Marines, scheduled to land on September 15th, a mere 3 days hence, would now enjoy absolute and undisputed air superiority from the precise moment their landing craft touched the beaches. The underlying mathematical reality was brutal in its simplicity, yet profoundly significant. Each of those torpedo bombers, had they been allowed to launch, possessed the destructive potential to sink or severely cripple a vital transport ship. And each transport, he knew, carried approximately 1/500th of the entire Marine force, along with their indispensable equipment. A coordinated strike by even half of those 40 aircraft could have inflicted catastrophic devastation upon the invasion fleet, transforming the relatively shallow waters off Pleu into a watery graveyard. Stout, through his singular act of courage and skill, had single-handedly averted that nightmarish scenario. The Marines who would soon storm those beaches, he recognized, would likely never know his name, nor would they ever fully comprehend that their unopposed landing had been made possible by one pilot's audacious decision to attack an entire air base alone. Yet, they would be alive because of it. Such was the unforgiving calculus of warfare, an intricate, invisible web of cause and effect, where individual actions rippled outward, possessing the profound power to either save or condemn thousands. Beyond the immediate tactical gains, there was also a broader, more expansive strategic picture to consider. Japanese commanders throughout the entire Palau Islands chain had been heavily reliant upon those aircraft for both offensive and defensive operations. Without them, the entire theater balance of power had irrevocably shifted. American aircraft carriers could now operate with greater impunity and closer proximity to the shore, thereby providing significantly enhanced close air support for the ground troops. Reconnaissance flights could meticulously map Japanese positions without the constant threat of fighter opposition. Supply ships could undertake crucial runs to the beachhead without the paralyzing fear of devastating air attacks. One incredibly successful strafing run had fundamentally and irrevocably altered the entire operational environment for the duration of the entire Palau campaign. Yet, Stout, with the clear-eyed realism and hardened perspective of a seasoned combat veteran, also understood that Palau itself would undeniably remain a living hell for the Marines who were fated to land there. The Japanese garrison, numbering approximately 11,000 resolute men, was deeply entrenched within the island's formidable coral ridges and labyrinthine limestone caves, an intricate network of fortifications that no amount of air superiority, however absolute, could ever hope to eliminate. The ensuing ground fighting, he knew, would be savage, a brutal, relentless battle fought cave by cave and ridge by ridge, destined to become some of the bloodiest and most costly combat in the entire history of the Pacific War. His audacious attack had undeniably removed one major, immediate threat, but it had not, and could not, alter the fundamental, brutal reality that Palau was a natural fortress, a stronghold that would ultimately have to be taken at a terrible, agonizing cost. Still, every single Marine who managed to make it off those treacherous landing beaches alive, precisely because Japanese planes were not strafing them, represented a victory, however small, that profoundly mattered. His fuel gauge, he noted with a slight frown, was indicating a lower reserve than he would ideally prefer, the intense combat maneuvering and repeated high-speed passes having consumed his precious fuel reserves at a faster rate than initially projected. He meticulously pointed the Hellcat's nose towards the predetermined coordinates, where the mighty USS Hornet was expected to be, then settled into a steady, efficient cruise climb. The noticeable hole in his tail section, while not catastrophic, was indeed causing some minor aerodynamic drag, rendering the aircraft marginally tail-heavy, yet it was nothing he could not skillfully compensate for with judicious trim adjustments. Suddenly, his radio crackled to life, filled with an urgent cacophony of chatter. Other pilots, flying their own missions, were reporting the massive, unmistakable column of smoke billowing from Palau. Carrier controllers, their voices laced with a mixture of confusion and alarm, were urgently demanding to know the precise nature of the unfolding events. Disbelief and apprehension were rapidly spreading throughout the entire fleet. Stout, with a practiced hand, keyed his microphone and delivered what would undoubtedly become the most understated yet profoundly impactful after-action report of his illustrious career. Hornet Control. This is Stout. Mission complete. Palau airfield neutralized. Returning to base. The radio, after his declaration, fell into an unnerving silence for several prolonged seconds before the controller's voice finally responded, carefully professional, yet utterly unable to conceal the raw disbelief that permeated his tone. Say again your last, Stout. Did you say neutralized? Stout, allowing himself the rare luxury of a small, knowing smile, responded with unwavering conviction. Affirmative. The airfield is no longer operational. You'll want to scramble a photo bird to get documentation. Out. The Hellcat, piloted by Stout, made its decisive landing on the Hornet's flight deck a mere 40 minutes later, its tail hook expertly seizing the number 3 arresting wire. The impact sent a jarring jolt through the airframe, throwing the pilot's body against the secure harness straps. Almost instantaneously, the vigilant deck crew swarmed the warplane, their expressions shifting to wide-eyed astonishment as they absorbed the extent of its battered condition. The aircraft's posterior section was visibly riddled with innumerable shrapnel perforations, while streams of hydraulic fluid marred the fuselage, and conspicuous scorch marks emblazoned the wings, testaments to its perilous flight through the debris of its own detonations. The seasoned plane captain, ascending to assist Stout from the cramped cockpit, found himself momentarily speechless, his gaze oscillating between the pilot, the starkly empty ammunition counters, and then back to Stout. A palpable hush descended across the entire deck as the astonishing news circulated. The aviator responsible for the immense column of smoke, a beacon of destruction discernible from a distance of 50 miles, had just returned. By the moment Stout's boots firmly met the deck, a considerable throng had already gathered, eager to glimpse the extraordinary pilot. The subsequent intelligence debriefing, a rigorous session, extended over a period of 3 intense hours. Stout was positioned within the carrier's dedicated intelligence center, where a plethora of maps lay unfurled across the expansive table. He meticulously guided a panel of senior officers through every intricate detail of the audacious attack, his narrative compellingly corroborated by the aerial photographs captured by reconnaissance birds, which unequivocally confirmed his earlier damage assessments. The visual evidence presented a stark and undeniable truth, far more eloquent than any verbal account. A staggering 40 enemy aircraft had been reduced to charred, skeletal husks. The airfield itself bore the scars of the assault, pockmarked with craters and still smoldering, with fires continuing to rage many hours after the initial strike. The intelligence officers, grappling with a profound sense of disbelief, persistently reiterated the same fundamental questions, albeit phrased in various ways, as if unable to reconcile the magnitude of the achievement with the fact that a single pilot had accomplished it. How many attack passes did you execute? Merely 2. What quantity of ammunition did you expend? Every single round. Did your aircraft sustain any hits? Indeed, but nothing of critical consequence. Were you accompanied by wingmen? No, I operated alone. The relentless questioning eventually subsided, giving way to a profound silence, imbued with a mixture of reverence and utter astonishment. For his exceptional courage during the Plume mission, the United States Navy bestowed upon Stout the Distinguished Navy Cross, the service's second highest commendation for valor. The official citation eloquently stated in part, "For extraordinary heroism and distinguished service in aerial combat against enemy Japanese forces." However, this significant official recognition arrived several months later, long after Stout had already embarked on dozens of additional combat sorties, and as the relentless machinery of war inexorably ground forward across a succession of islands, through numerous invasions, and into many more desperate engagements. He maintained a notable reticence concerning the Plume mission among his fellow pilots, skillfully deflecting inquiries with understated shrugs and adept changes of subject. In the vibrant and often boisterous ready-room culture prevalent in carrier aviation, where competitive egos frequently ran high and pilots vied to recount the most thrilling war stories, Stout's quietude and modesty were strikingly conspicuous. He had undeniably achieved something genuinely extraordinary, yet he appeared almost ill at ease with the considerable attention and admiration his singular feat garnered. Upon the cessation of hostilities in August 1945, Stout made a quiet return to civilian existence, exhibiting the identical unwavering, understated determination that had so distinctly characterized his distinguished military tenure. He established roots in California. There, he engaged in the burgeoning aerospace industry during the post-war economic expansion, diligently raised a loving family, and cultivated a life that, to any external observer, appeared entirely conventional and unremarkable. He seldom, if ever, broached the subject of his impressive combat record, even among his most intimate confidants. Consequently, his children matured with only a faint, if any, awareness that their father had once been an extensively decorated Navy pilot. It was not until many decades later, when military historians embarked upon the meticulous task of documenting the lesser-known yet pivotal actions of the Pacific War, that Stout's extraordinary blue mission began to receive the profound attention it so richly merited. Researchers, assiduously sifting through countless after-action reports and archived carrier deck logs, unearthed the comprehensive documentation pertaining to his unparalleled solo attack. They subsequently recognized it as one of the most devastating single-pilot strikes ever recorded in the annals of aviation history. The mission's long-term influence on military doctrine, though initially subtle, proved undeniably significant and enduring. Both Air Force and Navy tactical schools incorporated Stout's audacious attack into their curricula, studying it as a quintessential case study in the art of exploiting enemy vulnerabilities and comprehending the intricate web of secondary effects. The strategic principle of targeting concentrated enemy assets to precipitate cascading failures became an indispensable cornerstone of modern ground attack strategy. Furthermore, his resolute willingness to act with decisive initiative when confronted with a fleeting opportunity, even when it extended beyond the explicit parameters of his original orders, evolved into an exemplary model of the self-reliance and proactive decision-making that contemporary militaries earnestly endeavor to cultivate in their commissioned officers. Ultimately, the mission unequivocally demonstrated that, under a precise confluence of circumstances, a single pilot endowed with exceptional skill, profound courage, and a measure of good fortune could indeed fundamentally alter the trajectory of a battle. Stout passed away in 1989 at the venerable age of 73, having lived to witness the conclusion of the Cold War and the widespread adoption of the military tactics he had so instrumental in pioneering as standard doctrine. His obituary, published in the local newspaper, did indeed make a brief mention of his commendable Navy service, but it allocated only a solitary paragraph to this aspect of his life, choosing instead to focus predominantly on his post-war career and his family commitments. The individuals who gathered to attend his funeral largely remained oblivious to the fact that the quiet, unassuming man they had known had once, in a mere 8 minutes of intense violence over a largely forgotten island in the Pacific, single-handedly annihilated an entire enemy air base. Yet, the Marines who bravely stormed Plou's beaches on September 15, 1944, and were spared from being torn asunder by relentless torpedo bombers and devastating dive bombers, owed their very lives to a critical decision made by one pilot in the precious seconds before he plunged his Hellcat into a steep dive and unleashed a torrent of fire upon 40 stationary targets. This, then, is the enduring legacy that truly resonates, a legacy measured not in the gleaming luster of medals or the eloquent prose of citations, but rather in the thousands of lives that were preserved, the countless men who ultimately returned home, all because Robert Cowboy Stout, with an unwavering conviction, determined that some opportunities present themselves but once, and that certain risks are unequivocally worth embracing.